Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all to Awareness Technologies webinar talking about the 2015 top information security threats to your organization. My name is Kristen. I'm going to be walking you through this today. A few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. First, I just want to let you know everybody on the line is on mute. So if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, please type that in the GoToWebinar box and we'll be sure to answer those at the end of the webinar. Also want to let you know that we will be recording today's webinar, so if you'd like a copy of that, we'd be happy to provide it, as well as a copy of the slide deck. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to be talking about today? So first we're going to talk a little bit about some breaches and what the causes of those breaches are. We're going to give you some real-world examples of what they were. We'll be talking about the impacts that those breaches have. We're going to talk about some of the solutions that we can do to prevent those issues going forward. And then we'll have a Q&A section at the very end to be able to address any questions for you. So let's go ahead and get started and talk a little bit about breaches. So this slide, it's a little busy, but it's interesting because what it's doing is it's talking about some of the biggest data breaches. And that's basically saying things that occurred that affected more than 30,000 records. And what you'll see as this animation gets going is that at the top, it's really crowded, and that's mostly the most recent attacks. And then if you start scanning back down, you see it becomes a lot more rare that an incident occurs. So back in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, very slim chance basically that somebody was going to get affected. And now it's much more prevalent. And really what that's just basically doing is kind of setting the tone for you to understand what the atmosphere is out there now. And the fact that data breaches are becoming much, much, much more common. And it's becoming a real risk for companies of all shapes and sizes, not just the largest companies, not just the AOLs and the TJ Maxxes. So from 2005 to 2014, the total number of record breaches was a little under 5,000. And the total number of records exposed, you can see right there, was over 669 million records. So that's a lot of people that have been affected, obviously. I'm sure that's a lot more than most people really realize that have been affected out there. So what is the goal? Why are people doing this? And obviously, most of the time, the goal is money. So they want to make money off of this. So we talk about how much is your data worth here. And so on the black market, if I were to have a credit card that was a verified credit card that I could go after and provide, I would get $32 for every credit card number. Bank account details are $5 and your health credentials are $10. And there's, if anybody's familiar with these stories, there's all of these black market websites that are basically like eBay or like Amazon. And when they do a data breach, they take all your information, they post it up, they sell it in packages, and you're able to get all this information for these low costs. So it makes sense for these guys to go after big targets, get as much of this information as they can, and then sell it off as quickly as possible. So what causes a data breach? What are the sources of data breaches? Most people, I think of hackers as the biggest source. They think of the guy with the hoodie, here he is, hacking away on a computer somewhere, just showing off how cool and bad he is by hacking into your systems. And, hackers do account for some of the traffic, but you can see it's under half, it's about 32%. Really, the bulk of the data breach sources, what makes up the rest of the pie for the most part, are things that you would consider internal threats. So third parties that have access to your information that's stored on mobile data from your employees or from third parties. Just a straight up malicious insider who's going to be taking information. Then there's the careless insider. That's the person who hits the wrong button, sends the wrong email, whatever it might be. They weren't being malicious, but they caused the breach nonetheless. And finally, accidental exposure, which I think kind of goes in with the careless insider, but maybe can't be tracked back to an individual person. So what that means is 32% is outside bad guy. Everything else is inside information that's within your organization, that no one is sitting there hacking, trying to take, but for one reason or another, whether it be somebody who's purposely wants to hurt you, somebody who carelessly hurts you, accidentally hurts you, or a third party that's not protected hurts you. This is all information from within the organization that gets exposed. So what that means is that there's this dramatic increase in the last year of third parties being part of the exposure. So we talk a lot about making sure you understand who your vendors are, making sure you lock down what information goes out to your vendors, and not just vendors, obviously, consultants, people who are contract workers, folks that are inside that aren't necessarily employees. Malicious insiders has had an 80% increase over the last year. So having that bad guy who works for you is a big component. And then finally, probably something that most of us eventually at one point or another will fall into, which is careless insider. And certainly I've been guilty of almost typing in the wrong email address and hitting send before I catch it, or something along those lines. It's something that happens. People are busy. They're trying to get through things as quickly as possible. They're trying to be helpful, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. Once the information is out there, it's out there. It doesn't matter with intent necessarily that caused it. Doesn't make that information less exposed just because somebody did it on accident or not. So when we talk about what sources really pose the greatest threat to your organization, kind of going back to that concept of most of this is coming from the inside, ultimately hackers are only 17%. So we spend millions and millions of dollars, all these organizations spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars trying to prevent the bad guy from getting in. And so very often we forget about the folks who are there already, who easily have access into information and what they can do with it. So employees are 60%. Former employees, and this is interesting, 17%. And if you've been on one of our webinars before, we oftentimes talk about organizations forgetting to lock down credentials after people leave, or people walking out the door with information. And so former employees, just because they're gone doesn't mean they're not a risk for you. And you really need to make sure you have good policies in place to make sure that former insiders can't get inside anymore. And then there's your customers who who can often leak stuff by accident, but it's a very small component. And then finally, competition. And I guess that would kind of be more like insider, espionage, which I think probably most of us don't necessarily need to worry about, but it is a concern there. So let's talk about some examples. It's always good to have real world examples as we talk about kind of this theoretical risk, and we have lots of pie charts and stats, but it's always good to know, if it's actually happened to somebody or not. So this is Fidelity National Information Services, very large company. They had an employee go in and take a little over 8 million customer records, which included, you can see here, name, address, bank account, credit card, quite a nice hefty set of information here. And the employee basically sold that on the black market. We have Countrywide. Most people are familiar with Countrywide. They had an instance where an employee was convicted of downloading 2.5 million borrower files and selling that information to other loan officers. So here's somebody who's figured out a good side business that they can do. They can take people who've done Countrywide loans and find some other loan officers and sell them some hot leads at the low price of creating a data breach for Countrywide. So interesting kind of series of information there. This is TD Bank, and certainly don't want to bash on TD Bank, but they happen to have a number of data breaches. So certainly if you're getting a copy of this slide, this is something worth taking some time and reading over. But the gist of this is these are a series of data breaches, all which involved employees. So whether it be employees inappropriately obtaining information, employees providing to unauthorized third parties, employees doing some kind of accidental exposure, and then there's some where the employees were doing purposeful exposure. So a good example that it happens to all shapes and sizes, and it can happen frequently. And then finally, our last example, which was Stanford Federal Credit Union. They had an example where an employee sent 18,000 member records to a member in an email that had a similar name as an employee. So that goes back to one of the examples I talked about, which is that it's not uncommon. You're in Outlook, you start typing someone's name, it looks right, you let it autofill in, and then all of a sudden you've exposed all these records to somebody. And oftentimes it's not like the other employee or the other customer is going to do anything with it, but once it's out, you still have to do all the notifications, and it has to become public, and it can be a real liability for your reputation. It can be really very embarrassing outside of all of that. So there's some real issues even when it's an accident, even when maybe nothing bad occurs from it. It doesn't really matter once the information's out there. It's just as damaging on a reputation. So, I mean, I think we kind of know that data is basically everywhere. So when you start talking about, well, how do I lock this down? How do I make sure employees can't access information? And it's one of those challenges that as we've become a more open society and we want to become more mobile, that we start having these things that enable mobility, but they also kind of open up holes within your data security. It was much easier when we all existed within one tight firewall circle and didn't go anywhere else. But you have laptops, you have email, you have tablets, you got your servers, you got phones, iPhones, Androids, whatever it might be. You got USBs, and then you got people who are allowed to work from home. They can VPN in, they can save information on their home computer. So basically the concept here is you just want to keep thinking about all the places that your data lives, and it's a changing environment, and it can be in a number of places that you don't even necessarily realize. So one of the things we talk about with laptops specifically is, and I think this can definitely get crossed over to mobile devices as well, iPhones, iPads, things like that. But, just laptops, which are not probably as valuable as an iPhone or an iPad at this point. Over 500,000 laptops are stolen or lost every year. And 10% of laptops that exist out in the world will be stolen in their lifetime. And most of them are stolen from the office. So it's not necessarily a situation where you're walking down the street and this bad guy comes up in his mask and he says, "Give me your laptop." So people tend to think, well, I leave my laptop at the office, it'll be totally safe. But most laptops are stolen from the office. And so when the laptop goes, all the data goes with it oftentimes. And especially if a laptop is stolen by an insider, even if you have encryption, they have the ability to log onto that computer with the encryption. All your data is gone in that instance too. So it's something to think about from a couple of different standpoints when we talk about data that resides on a laptop. Even if you've encrypted it, there's other ways that data can be lost or stolen, and it's just as dangerous. Some other ways that information goes off, removable media. I think most people have gotten fairly good about locking down USB ports, but it still is something we hear about on a really regular basis. Unfortunately, lost or stolen USBs that had confidential data on it. Smartphones, which we talked about before, people tend to walk around with these little computers in their pockets that are extremely powerful, but we don't think about them like computers. And I think that's a really dangerous mindset to still be having, because there's basically nothing I can't do on my iPhone that I can do on my laptop. And so all the data that I have in one place should be treated the same way when it's in another place. Corporate email, personal email, and basically the relationship between those two. So you have people that can take something from corporate email and send it out via personal email. Maybe they can't do it on their laptop, but can they do it on their cell phone? Can they create a new message right on their iPhone and take a message and forward it from their personal? Can they copy that message and put it out in their personal? So not just the individual components of those, but how they relate to one another. And then web uploads. We're seeing a huge uptick in people moving to things like Google Docs, Google Drive, Dropbox. And I think that folks don't always realize that they shouldn't be using those tools, and that if they should, that they have a good understanding of what data can and can't be placed in those places. Because once it's on the web, obviously you've lost some control of it outside of your network now. So let's go back and talk about some of the impacts of if one of those breaches occurs on one of those infiltration points that we just talked about. So the average data breach is going to cost you about $200. And so keep in mind as we talk about these numbers, this is the average. This is from a semantic source that got put out there. So basically what that means is there's some that are much, 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 much more. And there's some that are less, but the average, what you can kind of hope for, is about $200 a record. and it starts breaking down some add-ons, some a la carte add-ons to your data breach costs. So you're going to add $33 onto that if you don't have a tool that helps you with forensics. You're going to add $37 onto it if it's your first breach, because you're going to spend a lot of time tracking down what happened and what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to handle it. If it's a trusted third party that was a part of it, you can add another $26 onto that. And then finally, if it was a lost or stolen device that caused that, you can add another $22 onto that. So you can see that cost quickly adds up. And for a smaller organization, this can be something that can really, not just from a reputational standpoint, but from a financial standpoint, cause a lot of pain for your business. So what are some of the impacts? I mean, here's a credit card breach that led to a huge shopping spree at Saks. I mean, who do you think's picking up the bill for that? Here's a data breach that caused some hefty fines that got applied. So $12.5 million in fines and fees. Basically, I think you're seeing a lot more where the accountability is being placed on the financial organizations for this. And I know you guys are aware of, the new chip and PIN that's coming out. So, retailers are going to be held to a higher count of standard, and so are financial institutions. So there's a lot of changes here in how things are going to be handled. So we can keep adding these up, but basically it just means that there's a lot of impact there. So 74% report a loss of customers when this happens to them. I think you can look at Target as a really good example of this is going to cost them money now in a lawsuit. It looks like it's certainly cost them money during the holiday shopping last year and probably into this year. I think I saw somewhere recently where it said Target hasn't regained the customer share that they lost after that data breach. They're going to probably face litigation. They're going to definitely face some fines. If you're a public company, they're going to see some decline in share value. And then, it tends to be where management takes an overhaul after this. Even if they weren't directly responsible, odds are, boards or whatever it might be look at who was in charge when it happened, and those people are usually shown the door. And then finally, something that I'm sure everybody wants to see, but an increased regulatory scrutiny. So you're definitely going to have people breathing down your neck if you didn't have them already, and you're going to be a target now for those folks. So that's a little bit about the climate that we're living in right now from a data breach standpoint. So what I want to do with the next couple of minutes is just talk a little bit about awareness technologies and who we are and why we know some of this stuff and what we offer as a portion of fixing this problem. Obviously, it's a problem that can't be solved by just one technology, but we fit into the ecosystem for fixing data breach and insider threat. So we're a company based in Connecticut. We're about 12 years old, a little bit more now at this time. And what we are is we're a one-stop solution for insider threat. We're basically 4 technologies in one that kind of solved the endpoint problem. And we're super easy to use. We have about 10,000 customers and we have partners all over the world, basically, and we're adding new ones all the time. We're trusted by really, really big guys, and we're trusted by really, really small guys, and we're trusted by everybody in between. And something that's important for you guys to understand is that we're trusted by folks that are heavily regulated, like the government, financial institutions, healthcare, things like that. So one of the solutions that we offer that resolves this issue is our data loss prevention. And basically one of the things we can do is we can scan, looking for data at rest. We see what's being saved on the computers. We identify if that information is something that should or shouldn't be saved locally. And then we flag it as a violation. We let you remove it. And then it'll continuously scan after those policies have been put in place to make sure additional information doesn't get saved locally that shouldn't be saved locally. We can stop information from leaving via removable media and via email and web uploads. So we can basically lock all those things down. And we can do it based on policy, so it doesn't have to be a straight on-off switch. Maybe some things you're okay with going out, and some things you obviously aren't. So we're able to kind of set up some smart policies that say this kind of information shouldn't leave via USB, this kind of information shouldn't leave via email. Well, it's okay if it leaves via corporate email to a corporate email address, but it's not okay if it leaves a corporate email to a non-corporate email address. So ideally, in that situation, we would have been able to stop that breach with that credit union where they sent the email to an employee, a customer that had a similar employee name, because we would see that it was going to an outside email address and we would block it. Whereas if it had gone to the employee, it would have been an inside email address, we would have allowed it to continue. And then finally, our Sonar product, which is our employee monitoring product, which is basically a recording of everything that happens within your employee computer. So we're watching everything that happens, we're playing it back like a video, and then we're able to really monitor. So think of it as a security camera on your computer. We're looking at things like theft. We're looking at evidence of stuff that's going out via the removable media. We're also looking at, them stealing money by wasting company resources, wasting time, and then actually being able to take over remote control of the computer. We can do things like block apps that waste time, so you can stop that kind of data from going on. But basically, the real deterrent here is that it's going to record everything that's going on. So folks tend to be more careful when their behavior gets changed, when they know that they're being monitored. That's the same reason you have security cameras in your branches. And not only that, but then you also have the forensics for if something does happen, you can play it back, watch the video of what occurred, and then you can also get proactive notifications. It also has a component of web filtering, and what's unique about our web filtering is that sometimes when you're doing a network-based web filter, you get all these random URLs. So maybe you get something like answers.yahoo or jobs.monster, but you really don't know what it was they were looking for within those. With us, we'll give you a clear-cut name of the URL. We'll give you the search terms. We'll give you a link to the page that they were on, so you know exactly what page of answers.yahoo they were looking for. Maybe they were looking for something that was harmless. Maybe they were looking for, ways to circumvent your firewall. Whatever it might be, you'll be able to know that. And then on top of that, we'll also be able to take screenshots of those pages, so you can kind of have the visual evidence of what was happening. And then finally, geolocation, going back to those lost or stolen laptops. Geolocation and the recovery is invisible. Just like everything that we do, it's invisible on the computer. We're able to track and see where your laptops go. If someone reports that they're lost or stolen, we're able to see where it's at. We're able to help out with law enforcement with that. And then one of the other things we're able to do is tell you if it's even lost or stolen. Sometimes it's just misplaced. It checks in at the building at your office. Sometimes it checks in at your employee's home. So you are able to see that at any time to know where your resources are at. So where does all this work at? So obviously, one of the things with traditional solutions is that it's only going to work on your company network. So you're going to be sitting in your office, or you're going to have to have been VPN'd in to be able to see it. But with us, we're going to work everywhere. So we're going to work in your office. We're going to work when folks are traveling. We're going to work when people are home. They're not going to have to VPN back in. It's on the computer itself, doing the monitoring, doing the alerting, doing the reporting, regardless of what network you're on. So that means that you're fully protected now, regardless of where in the world you go, what in the world you do. You don't have to come back to the corporate network. You don't need to do any of that stuff. It's super easy to use. You're just installing it on the individual computers. You can push it out. And it's really something that's super straightforward and super easy to monitor, so that it becomes something that isn't a headache for you to do. It's not a $100,000+ implementation that overhauls your whole network. It's a quick and easy solution that gets pushed right out to those computers, and it monitors all the time, anywhere, and it can save you, obviously, from a lot of the headache that those data breaches would cause. So I don't want to plug it too much. If you want to try it, we certainly have a free trial for you. You can install it right away. It takes about 5 minutes, see everything I just talked about, and then evaluate it, for yourself and see if it's something that works or not. So I'm slightly over my 20 minutes, but not by much. So what I want to do is open it up to any questions. I've been seeing some getting typed in as we've been going, so do want to answer those for you. If you are uncomfortable asking a question in a public forum, which I can completely understand, feel free to give us a call at any time. That's our main sales line. You can also shoot us over an email. You can go to our website, watch some videos we have there. You can request the free trial from there as well if you want, and we'd be happy to provide that for you. Give you a few options there. So with that said, let's go ahead and we'll address some of these questions, and we'll get started.